A forged will stole everything from a former Navy SEAL on one cold morning. His stepmother smiled behind perfect paperwork, believing the truth had died with his father. All he received was his mother's old house and a loyal German shepherd wearing a new collar. But on the very first night, a shadow lurking outside made the dog charge into the darkness, and the collar tore open. Inside was a hidden USB, left by the father who had been silenced before he could explain. Now the Navy SEAL must choose: expose the truth immediately, or wait until the entire corrupt network reveals itself. Where are you watching from? Please like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep writing more meaningful stories. Now, let's begin. The morning came bright and cold. The kind of northern morning that made every pine needle glitter as if the forest had been sharpened overnight. Kyle Mercer stood at the edge of the gravel driveway with one hand resting near the collar of his German shepherd and the other tucked into the pocket of his old field jacket. He was 35, tall and built with the compact strength of a man who had spent most of his life teaching his body to obey before his heart could argue. His shoulders were broad but not showy. His face was clean-shaven, all hard jaw and wind-burned skin, with gray-blue eyes that rarely gave away what he was thinking. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, slightly longer now than regulation would have allowed, though habit still kept it neat. He had been a Navy SEAL once. Some men wore that past like a medal. Kyle carried it like scar tissue. Beside him stood Drift, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat, amber brown eyes, and a quiet, disciplined stillness that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Drift wore a new leather collar, dark and stiff, with a plain metal buckle that looked almost too ordinary. Kyle had noticed it only once, several days before his father died, when the old man had insisted on replacing the dog's worn collar. "Old one's fraying," his father had said. Nothing more. That was how Thaddeus Mercer had always spoken. Few words, most of them locked from the inside. The house ahead of them rose from the slope like something built to outlast weather and forgiveness. Timber beams, pale stone, tall windows reflecting the morning sky. It had belonged to the Mercer family for 2 generations, though Kyle had never felt that it belonged to him, not after his mother left, not after his father let her go without chasing her, not after the years hardened into silence. The front door opened. Celia Mercer stepped out first. She was Kyle's stepmother, though the word had always felt too warm for what she was. Celia was in her late 40s, tall and slender in a charcoal wool coat that fit her body with a precise elegance. Her hair was honey brown, smooth, and pinned low at the back of her neck. Her skin was pale and carefully maintained, her mouth soft, her eyes the polished green of lake ice. She was not loud. She had never needed to be. Celia moved through rooms like a woman who understood that calm could be sharper than anger. Behind her came the lawyer. His name was Grant Bexley, a narrow man in his early 50s with a gray suit, thin lips, and silver-rimmed glasses that sat too perfectly on his long nose. His face had the dry, bloodless patience of someone who enjoyed procedure because procedure never asked him to feel anything. In one hand, he carried a black leather folder. Kyle noticed the folder first, then the absence. Ethan Rowe should have been there. Ethan had been his father's lawyer for nearly 20 years, an old, broad-faced man with white eyebrows, rough hands, and the plain-spoken honesty of someone who had seen too many families tear each other apart over polished tables. Ethan had been present for every major Mercer signature Kyle could remember, but today, there was only Grant Bexley, and Celia, and the cold. "Mr. Mercer," Bexley said, "we appreciate your punctuality." Kyle said nothing. Drift's ears shifted forward. Celia's eyes passed over the dog, then over Kyle, and paused nowhere. That was her gift, making a person feel dismissed without ever insulting him directly. "We can do this inside," she said. "No," Kyle answered. His voice was low, even. For the first time that morning, Celia looked at him properly. Kyle kept his gaze on the house, not her. "Read it here." Bexley hesitated for half a second, then opened the folder. Paper whispered against paper. The sound carried strangely in the cold air, thin and clean, like the wing beat of a bird. That new winter was coming. The reading began. There were words for everything, words that sounded official, bloodless, neat. Estate, accounts, holdings, transfers, final wishes, legally binding. Testamentary intent. Kyle listened without moving. He had been trained to hear gunfire through wind, footsteps through rain, lies through steady voices. But grief was harder. Grief did not announce itself. It sat in the ribs and waited. His father, Thaddeus Mercer, had changed the will only weeks before his death. That detail came early, almost casually. Bexley read it with a slight dip of the chin, as if it were a minor clause. The most recent testamentary document, executed and witnessed 3 weeks prior to Mr. Mercer's passing, supersedes all previous versions. 3 weeks. Kyle's hand tightened once inside his pocket. 3 weeks before his death, his father had been heavily medicated. Kyle had seen him only briefly then, in a dim upstairs room that smelled of antiseptic, cedar wood, and something sour beneath it. The old man's eyes had opened, but they had not fully found him. Celia had said the medication made him tired. The new doctor had said the same. Dr. Malcolm Vire, a man Kyle had met only once, smooth-faced, dark-haired, soft-voiced, with hands too delicate for the blunt work of illness. He had smiled often, but never with his eyes. Kyle remembered that now with the sudden clarity of a blade catching light. Under the terms of the will, Bexley continued, the primary residence, liquid accounts, investment assets, commercial holdings, and associated properties are transferred in full to Mrs. Celia Mercer. A crow called somewhere beyond the tree line. Then silence returned. Not empty silence, judgmental silence. Celia stood very still. She did not smile. That would have been too crude. Instead, she lowered her eyes slightly, performing restraint with almost religious care. Kyle looked at the house, not because he wanted it, because he suddenly understood how completely it had been taken. Bexley turned a page. To Kyle Mercer, the testator leaves one vehicle currently registered to the estate, a modest financial allocation pending administrative review, and full ownership of the property formerly belonging to Nora Vale Mercer, located beyond the North Ridge. His mother's house. Kyle felt something shift behind his breastbone. Not surprise. Something older. Nora Vale Mercer had been gentle in the way rivers were gentle, soft on the surface, strong enough underneath to carry whole seasons away. She had dark hair that smelled of rain and lavender soap, and a laugh that used to fill the kitchen of that old house before silence came and made a kingdom of everything. Kyle had not stepped inside that place in years. His father had left it to rot. Or so Kyle had believed. A small, ridiculous thought moved through him. Even at the end, the old man had given him a ghost. That was when Drift moved. Only one step. But Kyle felt it. The German shepherd's body shifted from stillness into attention. His head lowered slightly. His ears locked forward. His gaze fixed not on Bexley, not on the folder, but on Celia. The dog did not growl. That made it worse. Drift was not a nervous animal. He did not waste reactions. In combat training, dogs like him were taught to mark threat, scent, movement, intent. But Drift had always been more than training. He watched people the way old churches watched storms, silently, patiently, as if keeping record. Celia noticed. For one brief moment, something crossed her face. Not fear, recognition. Then it vanished beneath the smooth mask. "Your dog seems restless," she said. Kyle looked down. Drift did not look away from her. "He's fine." Bexley cleared his throat. "There is more." Kyle lifted his eyes. The lawyer continued. "The prior attorney of record, Mr. Ethan Rowe, is no longer associated with the estate. All legal instruments relevant to the final will were prepared and witnessed under my supervision." That was meant to settle the matter. Instead, it opened a door in Kael's mind. Ethan Rowe had been pushed out. His father's medication had changed. A new doctor, a new lawyer, a new will. And Celia, standing in the cold morning like a queen beside a throne no one had yet dared call stolen. Kael said, "Was he lucid?" Bexley's eyes flickered. Celia's head turned slightly. "Your father's attending physician certified his capacity," Bexley replied. "That wasn't my question." The lawyer's mouth tightened. "The documentation is in order." Kael almost smiled then, though nothing about him warmed. Documentation. Men had hidden behind paperwork since the first king learned a seal could do the work of a sword. Drift finally made a sound. A low breath. Not a growl. Not a bark. Just air passing through his chest, controlled and deep. Kael rested 2 fingers lightly against the dog's neck. He could feel the pulse there, steady but alert. The new collar sat beneath his hand, stiff leather against warm fur. For some reason, his father's voice returned. "Old one's fraying." Kael pushed the memory away. Not now. Bexley closed the folder. "If there are no formal objections at this moment," he said, "the reading is concluded." Formal objections. Kael knew what that meant. Money, lawyers, time, proof. The machinery of justice turned slowly, and people like Celia knew how to live comfortably in the delay. He looked at her then, really looked. Celia's expression held sympathy in the same way a knife held moonlight. "I know this is difficult," she said. The words were perfect. That was why Kael hated them. "No," he said quietly. "You don't." Something hardened in her eyes, but only for a second. Then she stepped back toward the doorway. "You'll have until tomorrow to collect anything personal from the guest room." The guest room. Not his room. Not his home. Bexley tucked the folder beneath his arm. "My office will forward the necessary documents regarding the North Ridge property." Kael nodded once. He did not trust himself with more. Celia turned and walked inside. Her polished shoes made no sound on the stone threshold. Bexley followed, thin and gray and careful, like a shadow that charged by the hour. The door closed. The house became silent again. Kael stood in the driveway with the cold pressing against his face and Drift beside him like a vow made of bone and fur. For a long moment, he did not move. He had been shot at, hunted, buried under rubble, and left awake for nights in places where the dark itself seemed armed. But nothing had ever felt quite like this. A man could prepare for enemies. It was harder to prepare for being erased. Drift leaned gently against his leg. Not much, just enough. Kael looked down. The dog's amber eyes lifted to his. Son, calm and steady, though something in them still held that strange focus from moments before. "What did you smell?" Kyle whispered. Drift only blinked. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the scent of resin, cold earth, and a house full of people pretending the dead had spoken clearly. Kyle turned toward the old truck at the edge of the drive. Behind him, the Mercer house stood bright in the morning sun. Ahead of him waited his mother's house, a place he had avoided for years, a place his father had left him at the very end, as if even dying, the old man could not say what he meant. Kyle opened the truck door. Drift jumped in without command, settling into the passenger seat with the quiet certainty of a creature who understood loyalty better than inheritance. Before climbing in, Kyle looked once more at the closed front door. He thought of his father's clouded eyes, the changed will, the missing lawyer, the new collar around Drift's neck. And still, he felt the old anger rise. "You could have just told me," he murmured to the house, to the dead, to the cold morning itself. No answer came, only the wind. Kyle got into the truck, started the engine, and drove away from the house that no longer claimed him. Drift sat beside him, facing forward, silent, watching, as if the story had already begun moving beneath their feet, and only the dog could hear it. The road to his mother's house did not announce itself. It slipped away from the main county road like a thought someone had almost forgotten, narrow and pale beneath the truck tires, bordered by winter grass and long-armed pines. Morning had already turned toward afternoon, but the light remained clean and bright, falling through the trees in sheets of gold so thin they looked breakable. Kyle Mercer drove without music. The old truck rattled over uneven ground, its heater breathing warm air that smelled faintly of dust and old vinyl. Beside him, Drift sat upright in the passenger seat, steady as a carved thing. The German shepherd's ears moved now and then, catching sounds beyond the truck's windows, the scrape of branches, the distant chatter of water under ice, the hidden stirring of small animals under brown leaves. Kyle kept both hands on the wheel. He had not spoken since leaving his father's house, not because he had nothing to say. There was too much. Words were crowding somewhere behind his ribs, pressing against his throat like men waiting at a locked door. But he had learned long ago that if he let them all out at once, they would not become truth. They would become noise. So he drove. The property came into view slowly. First, the broken mailbox, half swallowed by weeds. Then the split-rail fence, gray with age, sagging in places but still standing. Then the house itself. It sat in a shallow clearing, a 2-story structure of weathered wood and pale stone, smaller than the Mercer estate but warmer in shape. The roofline dipped slightly on the west side. Ivy had claimed part of the porch railing. One upstairs shutter hung crooked, tapping lightly in the breeze like a finger against glass. But the house had not collapsed. That was the first thing Kyle noticed. It should have looked abandoned, forgotten. It did not. The windows were dirty, but intact. The porch steps had been patched at some point. The gutters, though dented, were not completely choked with leaves. Someone had kept the ruin from becoming a grave. Kyle shut off the engine. Silence settled. Drift's nose lifted. The dog did not jump out immediately. He stared through the windshield at the house, amber eyes focused, body still. Not tense, not afraid. Listening, perhaps, or remembering something he had never lived. Kyle reached for the door handle, then paused. His mother had planted lavender near the porch. He remembered that suddenly, with the kind of force memory used when it wanted to hurt. In summer, the whole front walk had smelled purple and sweet. Nora Mercer used to cut small bundles, tie them with string, and hang them in the kitchen window. She said it kept the air gentle. Kyle almost laughed. Gentle air. That had been one of his mother's strange little phrases, as if air could choose kindness. He stepped out of the truck. Cold ground met his boots. The air here smelled different from his father's estate. Less polished, less controlled. Damp wood, old pine, faint earth, and beneath it all a trace of something almost floral, so weak it might have been memory inventing mercy. Drift hopped down after him, landing lightly. The new collar sat snug around the dog's neck, dark leather against thick fur. Kyle glanced at it without thinking, then looked away. His father's last small gesture still bothered him in a way he could not name. The front door did not open smoothly. It resisted, swollen slightly from years of cold and wet. Kyle pushed harder. The old hinges groaned. Inside, the house breathed out. Not rot, not abandonment, just age. Dust lay across the floorboards, but not evenly. That bothered him at once. Some places held thick gray film. Other areas looked disturbed, as if someone had passed through months ago, maybe weeks, careful enough not to leave much behind, but not careful enough to erase everything. The entryway was narrow. A faded runner rug stretched toward the sitting room. A brass coat hook hung crooked near the door. On the wall, a pale rectangle marked where a picture had once hung. Kyle stared at that empty shape longer than he meant to. There had been a photograph there once. His mother in a yellow sweater, laughing at something just outside the frame. Gone now. Of course it was gone. Drift moved past him slowly, not wandering, inspecting. His paws made soft sounds on the wood. He stopped near the sitting room entrance, lifted his head, and sniffed the air. Then he turned toward the hallway. Kyle closed the door behind them. The sound echoed through the house. He hated how familiar it felt. The sitting room still held a sofa covered by a sheet, 2 chairs, a small bookshelf, and the old stone fireplace. The mantel was empty except for dust, and one small ceramic bird with a chipped wing. Kyle remembered that bird. His mother had bought it at a roadside fair, laughing because his father called it ugly. Ugly things need homes too, she had said. Kyle picked it up. The ceramic was cold. He set it down again carefully. His father had left this place standing. Not restored, not loved, just standing. Like an apology too proud to kneel. Too late, Kyle muttered. Drift looked back at him. Kyle shook his head. Not talking to you. The dog blinked once, solemn as a judge. A vehicle engine sounded outside before fading near the drive. Kyle's body changed before his thoughts did. Shoulders loosened, feet angled, weight balanced. Drift moved toward the door with quiet speed, ears forward, but no bark. Through the front window, Kyle saw an old blue pickup stop near the fence. A man climbed out slowly. He was about 70, maybe a little older, with a narrow but sturdy body, bent slightly by years of work rather than weakness. His hair was white and thin under a brown knit cap. A gray beard covered his jaw in uneven patches, trimmed with the impatience of someone who used scissors only when necessary. He wore a faded canvas jacket, oil-stained at the cuffs, thick gloves tucked into one pocket, and boots that had seen more mud than pavement. He approached the porch with one hand raised, not quite waving, not quite surrendering. Kyle opened the door before the man knocked. The old man stopped. His eyes were pale blue, watery at the edges, but sharp underneath. You must be Kyle. That depends who's asking. The old man gave a dry little smile. Gideon Shaw. I keep things from falling down around here, or try to. Your father paid me for it. Kyle studied him. Gideon Shaw did not have the look of a liar. That meant nothing, but Kyle noticed it anyway. The man stood with honest discomfort, as if he knew he had walked into old family weather and did not want to track mud through it. Drift stepped onto the porch beside Kyle. Gideon's gaze dropped to the dog. That one yours? Yes. Good dog. He decides that. For the first time, Gideon's smile reached his eyes. Fair enough. Kyle stepped aside, but did not invite him in fully. Gideon seemed to understand. He remained near the threshold, rubbing his hands together against the cold. Your father asked me years back to check the roof after storms, clear ice from the gutters, run the taps once in a while. Basic things. Said the inside wasn't my business unless a pipe burst. Why? Gideon looked around the entryway. His expression softened in a way that made him suddenly seem older. Because this was Nora's house. The name moved through the room like a match struck in darkness. Kyle's jaw tightened. Gideon noticed, but did not apologize for saying it. That at least Kyle respected. You knew my mother? Everybody knew Nora a little. Nobody knew her enough. Gideon glanced toward the sitting room. She was kind without being foolish. That's rarer than people think. Kyle said nothing. The old man cleared his throat. I didn't come to pry. Heard about the reading. Thought you should know the house is sound enough, but the back steps need replacing before spring. Furnace works if you coax it like a stubborn mule. Water runs brown at first, then clears. How often were you here? Once a month, sometimes twice in winter. Did my father ever come with you? Gideon paused. There it was. A small hesitation, not guilt, caution. Sometimes, he said. Kyle stared at him. Gideon looked away toward the porch rail. Not often. Never stayed long. Something hot and bitter stirred in Kyle's chest. So he had come here. His father had stood in this clearing, walked these boards, maybe touched these walls, and still never told Kyle. Never said, I went back. Never said, I remembered her. Never said anything. The anger felt old enough to have roots. Did he ask about her? Kyle said. Gideon's weathered face tightened. He didn't talk much. No, he didn't. He looked, though. Kyle frowned. Gideon nodded toward the hallway. Some people grieve loud. Some people just keep checking if the roof leaks on a house no one lives in. The words should not have landed. They did. For a moment, Kyle had no answer. Behind him, Drift moved. The dog had left the doorway and gone down the hall, slow and intent. His nose was not to the floor. It was lifted, drawing scent from the air. He stopped near the kitchen entrance, turned once toward the sitting room, then continued to the narrow staircase. Kyle watched. Gideon did too. That dog always do that? The old man asked. Depends. On what? Kyle did not answer. Drift climbed the first 2 steps, then stopped. He looked up the staircase, perfectly still. His ears tilted forward, his tail lowered, not tucked, just quiet. Then he turned his head back toward Kyle. There was nothing dramatic in the gesture. No bark, no growl, no cinematic thunder. Only that look. And yet something in Kyle's chest shifted. For one strange second, the house did not feel empty. It felt as if someone had been waiting upstairs and had just heard them arrive. Kyle's fingers curled once at his side. Gideon whispered, almost to himself, Well now. Kyle glanced at him. The old man looked embarrassed by his own reaction. Sorry. Place gets under your skin if you let it. Drift came back down, but he did not return to Kyle's side. Instead, he moved into the kitchen. Kyle followed. The kitchen was the room he remembered most clearly. Small square table near the window. yellowed curtains, white cabinets with worn handles. The sink beneath the glass where his mother had hung lavender bundles. One hook still hung there. Empty. Kyle stood in the doorway and felt, absurdly, like he was intruding. The room held ordinary things: a chipped mug, a drawer slightly open, a wooden chair tucked halfway under the table. Nothing dramatic, nothing that should have hurt. But grief was a thief with strange taste. It stole breath from the smallest corners. Drift crossed to the far side of the kitchen and sniffed near the baseboards. Then he paused beneath the window, directly below the empty hook. Kyle watched the dog's ribs move with slow breaths. "What is it?" he murmured. Drift did not respond. His attention remained fixed, but not on an object. On the air itself. Gideon had stayed near the hall, giving Kyle room. "Your father stood there once," he said quietly. Kyle turned. Gideon pointed toward the window. "Last fall. Came by when I was fixing the porch rail. I found him in here, just standing there. He said he was checking the frame for rot." "Was he?" "No." Gideon's voice softened. "He was looking at that hook." Kyle looked back at it. The old anger rose again, but now it was tangled with something more dangerous: uncertainty. He did not want uncertainty. Anger was cleaner. Anger gave a man somewhere to stand. Uncertainty made the ground soft. Gideon shifted his cap in his hands. "I'll leave you to it. If you need repairs, my number's in the mailbox, taped under the lid. Your father liked hiding practical things in inconvenient places." Kyle almost smiled. Almost. "Thanks," he said. Gideon nodded, then walked back toward the front door. Before leaving, he paused and looked at Drift. "That collar new?" Kyle looked sharply at him. Gideon lifted both hands. "Only noticed because the leather hasn't weathered. Good collar." Kyle glanced at Drift. The dog stood beneath the kitchen window, calm and watchful. "Yes," Kyle said. "New." Gideon nodded again, as if that answer meant nothing to him, and left. The blue pickup started outside, coughed once, and rolled away. The house settled around Kyle and Drift. For a while, Kyle moved through the rooms. He opened cabinets, checked pipes, lifted sheets from furniture. The work gave his hands something to do, while his mind tried to keep its distance. His mother's bedroom remained closed until late afternoon. When he finally stood before it, the hallway seemed narrower than before. The door stuck slightly. Inside, light fell across a bed frame, a dresser, and a cracked mirror clouded at the edges. Most of her things were gone. Not naturally gone. Removed. Selected. The drawers held only fragments: a scarf, a button tin, an old receipt, a hairbrush with no hair left in it. Kyle stood in the center of the room, breathing shallowly. "She waited," he said, though he had not meant to speak. Drift entered behind him and sat near the doorway. Kyle looked at the dresser. She waited for him to come back, and he didn't. The words were low, rough. His father had checked roofs, paid Gideon, stood under hooks, looked at empty places, but he had not come back when it mattered. Kyle felt loyalty and resentment collide inside him like two wounded animals. Outside, the sun dropped lower, brightening the windows with amber fire. Dust floated in the air like tiny lost souls. Drift rose suddenly. He walked to the closet door, sniffed once, then turned away. No alert, no signal. Just a small motion, enough to remind Kyle that the dog did not live in memory. Drift lived now, in breath, scent, movement, danger, devotion. Kyle envied him. By evening, He had coaxed the furnace to life with 3 curses, 2 careful adjustments, and 1 flat threat spoken into the metal grate. Heat began to move through the house slowly, reluctant but real. He set his duffel in the sitting room rather than choosing a bedroom. Drift lay near the front door, not sleeping. The new collar caught the firelight from the hearth, its buckle dull and plain. Kyle sat in the old chair by the fireplace, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The ceramic bird watched him from the mantel with its chipped wing. He thought of his father. He thought of his mother. He thought of Celia, standing on the porch of the estate, wrapped in charcoal wool and perfect calm, inheriting everything that had a name and a number. Then he looked around the small old house. This place had no polish, no grand staircase, no legal shine. But it had held something the estate never had. A pulse. Kyle leaned back, tired down to the marrow. "I don't know what you wanted me to find here," he whispered. The fire answered with a soft crack. Drift opened his eyes. For a moment, man and dog looked at each other across the dim room. Then Drift lowered his head again, facing the door. Always the door. Always the line between what was inside and what might come from the dark. Kyle let the silence settle. The house did not welcome him. Not yet. But it had not rejected him either. And in that thin space between grief and shelter, Kyle stayed. Night did not fall over the old house all at once. It gathered slowly at the windows, first in blue shadows beneath the pines, then in long strips of darkness stretched across the yard, then finally in a solid black line beyond the porch where the trees began. By the time the last of the daylight slipped away, the house seemed to have pulled itself inward, holding its breath against the cold. Kyle Mercer sat in the old chair near the fireplace, but he had not slept. The furnace ticked unevenly through the walls. The fire had burned low, leaving a red glow beneath blackened logs. Every now and then, the house made a small sound, wood shrinking in the cold, an old pipe settling, wind pressing against the siding like a hand testing whether it could get in. Kyle knew the difference between a house speaking and a man moving outside it. So did Drift. The German shepherd lay near the front door, his body long and still, black and tan coat catching the faint firelight along his shoulders. His ears were relaxed, but not fully down. His eyes were half closed in that deceptive way working dogs had, the way they appeared at rest while some deeper part of them remained awake and counting. Kyle leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The day had left him raw. Gideon Shaw's words had stayed with him longer than he wanted. Some people grieve loud. Some people just keep checking if the roof leaks on a house no one lives in. Kyle hated the sentence, not because it was foolish, because it might be true. He had spent years building one clean version of his father, cold, distant, too proud to come back, too stubborn to explain, too late to matter. It had been easier that way. A hard story was still easier than a complicated one. Hard things could be carried. Complicated things shifted their weight when you tried to hold them. Across the room, Drift opened his eyes. Kyle noticed before he heard anything. The dog's head lifted an inch, then another. His ears moved forward. The house went silent around them. Not truly silent. There was still wind, still the fire, still the faint electric hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. But beneath those sounds, something had changed. A thin pressure entered the room, the old animal knowledge that told a man the world had taken one careful step closer. Drift stood. No bark, no warning growl, just motion. His body tightened from shoulders to tail, every line becoming purpose. He looked toward the front window first, then the door. A low breath left his chest. Kyle rose without thinking. "What is it?" he whispered. Drift did not look back. Outside, something brushed against the side of the porch. Soft. Controlled. Not wind. Kyle's hand moved toward the fireplace poker, then stopped. Too clumsy. Too obvious. He crossed instead to where his duffel lay near the sofa and pulled out a compact flashlight. No firearm. He had left that part of his life locked away better than most men locked their grief. But his body remembered angles, cover, distance, and the 1,000 little betrayals of careless movement. Drift stepped closer to the door. Kyle reached for his collar. "Stay." The word was quiet. The dog heard it, and for 1 second obeyed. Then a shadow passed across the window, not close enough to see a face, just shape, a shoulder, a head. Gone. Drift launched. He hit the door with one paw before Kyle could catch him, not crashing wildly, but driving forward with a trained burst of force. Kyle swore under his breath and pulled the door open just enough. Drift slipped through like night-given teeth. The cold rushed in after him. Kyle followed. The yard was dark, blue-black beneath the moonless sky. The porch board snapped under his boots. The flashlight beam cut across the clearing in a hard white line, catching dead grass, the sagging fence, the pale trunks of birch trees near the drive. Drift was already moving, not barking. That told Kyle more than noise would have. The dog crossed the yard low and fast, following something near the fence line. Kyle swept the light left. There. A dark figure moved between the trees, not running in panic, withdrawing, controlled. Whoever it was had come prepared to leave quickly. "Hey!" Kyle called. The figure did not turn. Drift closed the distance. Then came the sound. A sharp metallic snap. A scrape. A strangled crack of old wire pulling tight. Drift jerked sideways near the broken section of fence, then twisted hard, freeing himself with a forceful shake. The shadow in the trees vanished deeper into the dark. Kyle ran. By the time he reached the fence, Drift had already stopped chasing. The dog stood with his head high, breath visible in short white bursts. His body remained angled toward the trees, but he did not pursue farther. Smart. Disciplined. A trained dog knew when the dark belonged to someone else. Kyle dropped to one knee beside him. "You hit?" His hands moved quickly over Drift's neck, shoulders, chest, legs. No blood. No limp. No flinch except one near the collar. The collar had torn. The new leather hung loose on one side, caught where an old line of rusted fencing wire had snagged and ripped it open. Kyle looked at the fence. A length of old wire, nearly invisible in the dark, had been dragged from beneath dead brush. Not a trap, maybe, or maybe something close enough to one. The flashlight beam shook once in his hand. He steadied it. There were footprints near the fence. One set. Fresh. Not Gideon's work boots. Not Kyle's. Narrower, with a ridged sole pattern. The prints approached from the east tree line, came near the porch, then doubled back toward the fence. The person had not been trying to break in. They had been looking, confirming. Kyle's eyes moved to the dark trees. Nothing. Only branches and silence. Drift stepped in front of him. Not behind. Not beside. In front. The German shepherd's shoulders filled the beam of the flashlight, ears forward, stance grounded. He did not snarl. He did not need to. The line he drew was simple enough for any man, beast, or old god of the forest to understand. Past this point, you answer to me. Kyle rested a hand on the dog's back. For reasons he could not explain, the gesture steadied them both. They returned inside without turning their backs fully to the woods. Kyle locked the door. Then the deadbolt. Then he wedged an old chair beneath the handle, not because it would stop someone determined, but because it would complain loudly before failing. Drift stood in the entryway, breathing evenly now, though his eyes remained bright. Kyle crouched in front of him again. "Let me see." The dog allowed it, though his attention kept flicking toward the door. Kyle removed the torn collar carefully. It came away in his hands, stiff and damaged, the leather split along one inner seam. Up close, the damage looked strange. The outer leather had ripped from the fence wire, but beneath it, the inside layer had separated too cleanly. Kyle frowned. He carried the collar to the kitchen table and set it beneath the hanging lamp. The yellow light made everything look older. The table surface was scarred with knife marks, water rings, and one dark burn near the edge. Drift followed and sat at his left knee. Kyle ran his thumb along the split seam. Something hard touched his skin. He stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved in the kitchen except the lamp's faint tremble from the draft. Kyle took out his pocket knife and eased the leather open. Not cutting much, just separating what had already torn. A narrow metal capsule slid free and dropped onto the table with a soft, final click. Kyle stared at it. It was no larger than a thumb joint, dull silver, sealed with a rubber-lined cap. Not decorative, not part of any normal collar. It had been hidden between layers of leather, carefully enough to survive casual inspection, poorly enough to show it had been done quickly. His pulse did not speed up. It slowed. That was how his body handled danger. The world narrowed until every small thing became sharp. He unscrewed the cap. Inside was a tiny USB drive, wrapped in thin plastic and pressed into foam. Kyle sat back. Drift watched him. The dog's torn collar lay between them like some wounded relic recovered from a battlefield neither of them had known they were fighting. Kyle picked up the USB. It weighed almost nothing. Still, it seemed to pull at his hand. His father had put this here. There was no other explanation that fit. Not Celia. Not Bexley. Not a stranger outside the house. His father had replaced Drift's collar days before he died. His father, who had said the old one was fraying. His father, who had always hidden meaning under practical words because plain feeling had frightened him more than any storm. Kyle let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You son of a—" He stopped. The insult died before it finished. Not out of respect, out of confusion. He stood and retrieved his laptop from the duffel. The machine was old, but reliable, with a battered casing and a cracked corner near the hinge. He did not connect it to the house Wi-Fi. There was no house Wi-Fi to connect to. He disabled wireless out of habit anyway, then inserted the drive. A locked volume appeared. Password required. Kyle stared at the prompt. Of course. He tried the obvious things first. His father's birthday. Rejected. His own birthday. Rejected. His mother's name. Rejected. Nora Mercer. Rejected. Mercer. Rejected. A military call sign his father used to mention when Kyle was young. Rejected. He leaned back, rubbing both hands over his face. Drift placed his muzzle on the edge of the table. Not begging. Watching. "You know it?" Kyle asked softly. Drift blinked. "Didn't think so?" He tried more. Dates. Old addresses. The name of the lake near the North Ridge. A phrase his father used when repairing machinery. Measure. Twice. Rejected. 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 Each failure struck something old inside him. Not surprise. Confirmation. His father had left him a locked thing. That was almost funny. The man could die and still manage not to explain himself. Kyle shut the laptop halfway, then opened it again. Anger rose, familiar and useful. "No," he whispered. "Not this time." He stood so abruptly the chair scraped the floor. Drift rose with him. Kyle began searching the house, not frantically, methodically. Drawers, cabinets, desk corners, the living room shelves, a tin box in the pantry holding nails and 3 dead batteries, the entryway drawer filled with old receipts, twine, and a rusted key to nothing. He did not know what he was looking for. That was the worst kind of search. At some point near midnight, he returned to his mother's bedroom. The room felt colder than the rest of the house. The cracked mirror reflected him in pieces: shoulder, jaw, eye, hand. He looked like a stranger assembled from war and inheritance. He opened the bottom dresser drawer. Inside lay the button tin, the scarf, and beneath them, a flat envelope tucked under the drawer liner. Not hidden well, just overlooked. Kyle pulled it free. The envelope had yellowed with age. No name on it. No note. Inside was a photograph. A wedding photograph. His father stood younger and almost unrecognizable, not smiling broadly, but looking at Nora as if the world had briefly become something he trusted. Nora wore a simple cream dress, her dark hair pinned loosely, a few strands escaping near her face. Her smile was bright, not posed, full of a brave and foolish hope that made Kyle's chest ache. He had seen the photo before as a child, but not like this. In the lower corner, written in faded blue ink, was one small line: Briar Chapel, June rain. Kyle stared at the words. A memory opened. His mother laughing in the kitchen while rain tapped the windows. "Your father looked like a drowned wolf when I met him," she had said. Standing outside Briar Chapel, pretending he didn't need shelter. Kyle returned to the laptop. His hands felt oddly calm now. He typed, "Briar Chapel, rejected." He typed, "June rain." Rejected. He sat still. Then he typed both together. Briar Chapel, June rain. The drive opened. For several seconds, Kyle did not move. The screen changed, showing folders and files, all named badly, hurriedly. Some were labeled with dates, others with fragments, clean system, no polished evidence package. This was not the work of a man who had planned for years. This was a dying man gathering broken glass in the dark. Kyle opened the first folder. Photographs. Celia entering a small inn 2 towns away with a man Kyle did not recognize. Tall, dark coat, face turned away from the camera. Another image. Celia and the same man inside a parked vehicle, close enough that no explanation could dress it as business. The next folder held screenshots of bank transfers, partial, messy, some names visible, others cut off. Accounts tied to shell companies, dates near the final months of Thaddeus Mercer's life. Another folder, messages. Fragments only, enough to suggest pressure, timing, medication. Signatures. The word compliant appeared twice. Kyle opened the final file. A map image. Low resolution. Likely photographed from a computer screen. Several locations marked across the northern region. Some circled once. Some circled again and again. Repeated points. No explanation. No key. No voice from the grave telling him what to do. Just pieces. Kyle sat in the kitchen as the fire died in the other room, and the house grew colder around him. Drift pressed against his leg. Kyle eyes moved over the map, the messages, the photos, the broken transfers. There was enough here to know Celia was not merely unfaithful, enough to know his father had feared something, but not enough to end it. Not enough to walk into a sheriff's office and demand justice. Not enough to challenge a will, expose a network, or name the man in the dark. Not yet. That realization did not weaken him. It sharpened him. Kyle closed the files. Then he copied the drive contents to an encrypted folder and removed the USB. He placed it back into the metal capsule, then into his pocket. Drift's ears lifted. Kyle turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, at the edge of the trees, a shape stood where no shape should have been. Still. Watching. The person was too far to identify. A dark vertical line between trunks. Perhaps the same figure. Perhaps another. Perhaps only the forest playing tricks on a tired mind. Then Drift moved. He crossed the kitchen without sound and stood between Kyle and the window, not barking, not shaking, just standing. The fireless house seemed to gather behind him, full of old grief and unfinished prayers. Kyle looked past the dog toward the trees. He understood then that the truth had not been discovered. It had been disturbed, and disturbed things either fled or came closer. He lowered his voice. Not yet. Drift did not look back. Kyle closed the laptop. The room went dim. Not until we know what this is. Outside, the shadow did not move. Inside, the German shepherd held the line. And for the first time since his father died, Kyle felt no urge to shout, accuse, or break something just to prove he still existed. He had something better than anger now. He had patience. Morning came too gently for what the night had left behind. Pale sunlight moved through the kitchen window in thin gold bars, touching the table, the old scarred wood, the closed laptop, and the torn collar lying beside Cale Mercer's hand. The house seemed almost innocent in that light. Dust glowed in the air. The repaired furnace murmured through the walls. Somewhere outside, a bird called twice and then went quiet. Kyle had not slept. He sat at the kitchen table with the USB, drive removed, copied, secured, and hidden again in the small metal capsule. The capsule sat in his palm like a bullet that had not yet been fired. Across from him, Drift lay on the floor with his head resting on his paws. The German shepherd's torn collar had been replaced for the moment with a spare nylon lead Kyle had cut down and fastened loosely around his neck. It was plain black, functional, and ugly enough that Kyle almost trusted it. Drift did not seem to care. He watched the room with calm, amber eyes, as if he understood that the shape of a collar meant nothing compared to the duty beneath it. Kyle looked at the laptop screen again. The map image filled it. No legend, no title, no explanation, just a grainy photograph of a digital map, probably captured from a screen in a hurry. Several places across the northern region had been marked in red. Some circles were faint and uneven, like the hand that made them had trembled. Other locations were circled twice, even 3 times. The repeated points bothered him. Men under pressure repeated what mattered. Kyle zoomed in, but the image blurred before it gave him much more. He could identify part of a county road, a river bend, a disused logging route, and 2 old parcel numbers that appeared only half visible. One place looked close to the North Ridge. Another sat near a service road that Kyle remembered from childhood, though he could not remember why. He opened the folders again, moving through them one by one. Photos of Celia with an unknown man. Partial bank transfers. Fragments of messages. medication references. The word compliant. The pieces did not become clearer with repetition. They became heavier. His father had not left him a confession. He had left him a wound, and trusted him to find the blade. Kyle shut the laptop and stood. Drift rose immediately. "No," Kyle said quietly. "Not yet." The dog stopped, but his ears remained forward. Kyle went to the front window and looked out at the yard. In daylight, the place where the figure had stood seemed harmless. Pines, frosted brush, the sagging fence, the old wire that had torn Drift's collar still lay half caught in the grass near the fence line. No footprints were visible from the window. The ground had hardened overnight, but the feeling remained. Someone knew enough to come close, not enough to force entry. Not yet. Kyle stepped back from the window. He needed a name for the map, not an answer, a starting point. By late morning, he drove toward the town records office with Drift in the passenger seat. The old house disappeared behind them, its crooked shutter flashing once in the rearview mirror like a tired eye. The town of Brackenridge sat in a wide valley between pine-covered hills, the kind of northern town that looked brighter in winter because everything unnecessary had been stripped away. The streets were clean but cracked. Storefronts carried hand-painted signs. A diner with blue awnings steamed at the windows. Pickup trucks lined the curb outside the feed store, each one wearing salt stains like old campaign medals. Kale parked near the county annex. The building was low and square, made of tan brick, with a flag moving stiffly in the cold wind. The sign near the entrance read, "Land Records and Archives," though 2 letters had faded until they looked like ghosts of themselves. Drift stepped down from the truck and stood close at Kyle's left side. Inside, the records office smelled of paper, printer ink, old carpet, and radiator heat. Filing cabinets lined the walls in long metal rows. Maps hung framed behind glass, some yellowed with age, some newly printed but already curling at the corners. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead with the persistence of a trapped insect. At the front desk sat a woman in her mid-30s with chestnut-brown hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. A few strands had escaped around her face, softening features that otherwise seemed built for focus. She had pale skin, a narrow nose, and gray-green eyes that moved quickly from document to document, then to Kyle, then to Drift, missing very little. She wore a dark green sweater under a denim jacket and no jewelry except a thin silver ring on her right thumb. Practical, unshowy. She looked like someone who had learned early that truth usually arrived badly filed. "You here for property tax forms," she said. "Or trouble?" Kyle paused. "Depends how good your records are." The woman looked up fully. Her expression did not change much, but interest sharpened behind her eyes. "That usually means trouble." Her nameplate read, Mara Bell. So, Kyle placed a printed copy of the map on the counter, cropped and cleaned as much as the image allowed. He had removed anything from the USB that did not need to be seen. The fewer people who knew the shape of the whole thing, the longer he stayed alive. "I need to identify these locations," he said. Mara took the paper. She did not reach for it like a clerk accepting another task. She held it like a puzzle. Her eyes moved over the marks once, then again. She turned the page slightly, searching for orientation. Then her fingers stopped at one of the repeated circles. "Where did you get this?" "Family file." "That's not an answer." "It's the safest one I have." Mara's gaze lifted to him. Most people would have asked more. Mara did not. That was the first thing Kyle liked about her. She looked down again. "Some of these are county parcels, old ones, but these two—" She tapped the paper lightly. "These don't match anything active." "Meaning?" "Meaning they either got merged, retired, or someone made sure they became difficult to search. Kyle studied her face. Can that happen? Mara gave a short laugh without humor. Anything can happen if the person asking has enough money and the person filing has enough reasons not to argue. Drift shifted beside him. Mara glanced at the dog. He friendly? No. She nodded, accepting that without offense. Honest answer. Rare around here. Kyle almost smiled. Mara took the map to a wide table near the back, where several large parcel books were stacked beside a computer terminal older than it had any right to be. She moved with quick, controlled efficiency, the sort of competence that did not announce itself because it had survived too long without applause. Kyle remained standing. Drift sat beside him, but his attention wandered to the side wall where a row of old rolled maps rested upright in a wooden bin. His nose lifted. Kyle noticed. What is it? Drift did not move toward the maps. He only breathed in slowly, then lowered his head again. Mara looked over her shoulder. Something wrong? Not yet. That's comforting. Kyle did not answer. Mara began searching. She entered numbers, checked indexes, pulled one oversized ledger from a lower shelf, then another. Her brow tightened. Every few minutes, she made a small note on a yellow legal pad. Kyle watched the pattern of her work. She was not guessing. She was eliminating. After nearly half an hour, she stopped talking altogether. That was when Kyle knew she had found something. Mara placed two records side by side. One was a modern printout. The other was a photocopy from an older archive, its edges gray and uneven. These should match, she said. They don't. No. She pointed to a parcel near the river bend. In the older record, this land was listed under a private holding company. Small, inactive, nothing interesting. 21 years ago, it appears in a transfer note. Then it disappears from the searchable index. Disappears how? Not deleted. That would leave an obvious hole. It gets absorbed into a maintenance classification. Road easement. Utility access. Nobody looks closely at those unless there's a dispute. Kyle looked at the repeated circles on the map. And the other marks? Mara's mouth tightened. Two of them show similar treatment. Different dates, different clerks, different companies. Same kind of vanishing. The office seemed quieter suddenly. Even the fluorescent buzz sounded far away. Kyle felt Drift lean against his leg, not seeking comfort, marking presence. Mara lowered her voice. Mr. Mercer, people mess with records for all kinds of reasons. Tax dodging, development, family disputes. But this, she looked back at the map. This is not one property being hidden. This is a pattern. The word settled between them. Pattern. Kyle had seen that word kill men. On screens, in routes, in habits, in radio traffic. A pattern meant intention. A pattern meant someone had done something more than once and believed no one would notice. Drift suddenly stood. His head turned toward the old map bin. This time, he moved. Slowly. Not pulling. Not lunging. He crossed the office with his nose lifted, then stopped before one rolled map tied with a faded red string. He sniffed once, then looked back at Kyle. Mara froze. Kyle did too. What's in that one? He asked. Mara walked over, frowning. Old survey overlays. Mostly useless unless you enjoy headaches. She pulled the roll free, untied it, and spread it carefully across the table. The paper was brittle and yellowed at the edges. A survey grid covered the region north of Brackenridge, including the ridge, the river bend, the logging route, and several service corridors that no longer appeared on modern maps. One of the faded lines matched a repeated point from the USB image, then another, then a third. Mara's fingers stopped moving. Kyle looked at Drift. The dog sat calmly near the table, as if he had done nothing extraordinary. Mara whispered, "How did he know?" Kyle did not answer immediately, because he did not believe in magic. Not the soft, candlelit kind people sold to one another when grief became too heavy. He believed in scent, training, memory, and the brutal intelligence of living things that had never learned to lie to themselves. Still, in that moment, with an old map spread under yellow light and his father's broken clues beginning to align, something moved through him that felt very close to prayer. Not proof of heaven, not a message from beyond. Just the terrible possibility that love, even when clumsy and late, could still leave a trail. He didn't know, Kyle said quietly. He noticed. Mara looked at him, then at Drift. "Sometimes that's enough," she said. Kyle bent over the old survey map. The repeated points were not random. They sat along forgotten access corridors, places where land designation, private holdings, and county maintenance zones overlapped. Not valuable places on paper, not attractive, no lakefront, no commercial frontage, no reason for ordinary people to care. Perfect places to hide movement. Not necessarily people. Maybe money. Maybe assets. Maybe both. Mara traced one line with her pencil. If someone used these as shell properties, they could route transactions through maintenance contracts, environmental work, access rights. Small amounts at first, then larger ones buried in layers. "You sound like you've seen this before." "Not exactly." Her eyes darkened. "My father lost his land because a developer buried him in filings he didn't understand. By the time we found the trick had become legal." She tapped the map. "So I learned to read the tricks." Kyle understood then why she looked at records like they could bite. Mara Bell was not just a clerk. She was a woman who had been taught by loss to distrust clean paper. "Can you copy these?" Kyle asked. "I can copy some. Not all. If I pull too much too fast, someone might notice." Kyle watched her. She said it before he asked. "Yes, these systems log searches." That confirmed more than he wanted. Who sees the logs? Usually no one, unless someone is waiting to see them. Drift's ears shifted. Kyle folded the printed map carefully. Mara looked at him for a long moment. "You're not dealing with a family fight, are you?" "No." "Does this connect to your father?" Kyle's silence answered. Mara exhaled slowly. "I heard he passed. I'm sorry." Kyle gave a small nod. He had learned that grief made people say things they could not fix. Sorry was one of them. He no longer blamed anyone for trying. Mara gathered several copies, old parcel references, and handwritten notes. She placed them into a plain folder, then slid it across the table. "Don't show this to anyone who doesn't already know they need it. That list is short. Keep it that way." Kyle took the folder. Before leaving, he looked again at the old survey map. There was one point near the North Ridge circled repeatedly in the USB image. On the older survey, the location was marked only by a faint access line and a number half faded by time. Mara followed his gaze. "That one bothers me too." "Why?" "Because it has no reason to exist." Kyle stared at it. Outside, a truck passed slowly along the street. Tires hissing over wet pavement. Drift turned his head toward the window. Kyle noticed, but did not move. The truck continued past. Maybe nothing. Maybe not. He tucked the folder inside his jacket. "Thank you," he said. Mara's expression softened slightly. "I didn't do it for you." "No? I did it because records are supposed to remember what people try to erase." Kyle held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. He and Drift left the records office without looking back. The cold outside felt cleaner than the warmth inside. Kyle walked to the truck, aware now of windows, reflections, parked cars, the timing of footsteps, the small distortions that told a man whether he was alone. He placed Drift in the passenger seat, then stood by the driver's door for 1 extra second. Across the street, in the diner window, his own reflection looked back at him. A man with tired eyes, a folder beneath his jacket, a dead father's unfinished warning in his pocket. Kyle got into the truck. Drift faced forward. As they drove out of Brackenridge, the map in Kyle's mind changed shape. It was no longer a mystery image on a screen. It was land, roads, records, hidden corridors, repeated points where the official world had quietly looked away. His father had not left directions. He had left damage. And damage, if followed carefully enough, could lead to the hand that made it. By the time Cale Mercer drove back toward the old house, the northern sky had turned the color of pewter. Clouds pressed low over Brackenridge, flattening the afternoon light until the whole valley looked like a photograph left too long in water. The road unwound ahead of him in gray ribbons, wet at the edges where frost had begun to soften. Pine shadows leaned across the pavement. Every mile away from town felt quieter than the last. Kyle kept one hand on the wheel and the other near the folder tucked inside his jacket. Mara Bell had given him more than copies. She had given the map a body. Old access corridors, hidden maintenance classifications, parcels folded into systems no one looked at twice. Repeated marks that no longer felt like desperation, but design. His father had not left him answers. He had left him places where lies had touched the earth. Drift sat beside him in the passenger seat, wearing the spare black nylon collar Kyle had made from the cut-down lead. The German Shepherd's thick black and tan coat caught the weak light through the windshield. His amber eyes remained forward, but his nose worked softly now and then, testing the air that came through the old truck's vents. The torn leather collar rested in the glove compartment. The USB was hidden elsewhere. Kyle had learned long ago never to keep the key beside the door it opened. He did not go directly home. Not at first. He drove past the turnoff once, continued 2 miles, pulled into a gas station, bought coffee he did not want, and watched the reflections in the store window while the cashier talked about the weather. Then he took the long way back through a logging road, doubling once, stopping twice where the tree line offered a view of the road behind him. No obvious tail, no repeating vehicle, no careless shadow. That almost bothered him more. Back at the old house, he parked where the truck could face outward. A small habit. A soldier's habit. An old superstition dressed as practicality. He left the engine running for a moment and studied the yard. The fence still sagged where Drift had hit the wire the night before. The porch sat empty. The upstairs shutter tapped lightly against the frame. Nothing moved. Drift did not wait for permission this time. When Kyle opened the door, the dog stepped down and stood still beside the truck, nose lifted. He did not look toward the house. He looked toward the road. Kyle followed his gaze. There was nothing there but gray gravel and the dark seam of trees beyond it. Still, Kyle listened. Wind. Branches. A crow far off. No engine. No footstep. No voice. Drift's ears tilted forward, then relaxed by a fraction. "Yeah," Kyle murmured. "I feel it too." He spent the next hour turning the old house into something less welcoming. Not visibly. That was the trick. A man who expected danger but wanted to look afraid did different things than a man who expected danger and wanted no one to know. Kyle did not board windows. He did not set obvious traps. He did not leave lights blazing like some frightened homeowner trying to keep shadows from remembering him. He checked door frames. set thin threads low where they would break if a window opened, placed a glass jar on the inside sill of the rear mudroom window, balanced badly enough to fall if disturbed, but naturally enough to look like poor housekeeping. He moved his duffel from the sitting room to a dark corner under the stairs. Drift followed, always close, always silent. The dog's behavior had changed since Brackenridge. Before, he had searched. Now, he guarded. He positioned himself between Kyle and open spaces, between Kyle and windows, between Kyle and the unlit hallway when the furnace kicked and the pipes muttered through the walls. There was nothing dramatic in it, no cinematic growl, no theatrical display of loyalty, just the old and holy labor of standing where danger would arrive first. By late afternoon, Kyle opened the laptop again and reviewed the map, but only from the copied drive stored offline. He did not linger on any live system. He made handwritten notes instead, using block letters and old shorthand only he would understand. He marked 3 points Mara had flagged as suspicious, then circled the one near the North Ridge. He was still staring at it when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Kyle looked at the screen. He let it ring. It stopped. A message arrived 10 seconds later. No words, just a photo. The image showed the old house from the road. Taken that day. Kyle did not move. Across the room, Drift lifted his head. The dog had not heard the message, not really, but he heard the change in Kyle's breathing, the tiny shift in the room when a man's blood made a decision before his mind named it. Kyle opened the photo wider, low angle, far distance, shot from inside a vehicle or behind brush. The house looked small, lonely, almost harmless. His truck was visible near the porch. So was Drift's shape near the front step. No sender name. No threat. That was the threat. Kyle saved the image to an offline archive, then powered the phone down and removed the SIM card. Drift stood and crossed to the front door. Not fast. Not startled. Certain. He faced the door and stood there in silence, body square, ears forward, breath slow. The old house seemed to shrink around them. Kyle watched him and felt something cold settle into place. Whoever had come close the night before had not been curious anymore. They were confirming, and now they wanted him to know. Outside, the light faded into evening. The wet branches turned black. The porch boards grew slick with frost. Kyle slipped the SIM card into a small tin and placed it beneath a loose brick in the fireplace. Then he put on his jacket. Drift turned his head. "Work," Kyle said. The dog's posture changed at the word. Not excitement. Recognition. Kyle left the house dark and walked out through the back, not the front. He and Drift moved through the trees behind the property, looping wide toward the road. The forest was cold enough to make every breath visible. Fallen needles muffled their steps. The earth smelled of wet bark, iron, and old leaves. At the edge of the road, Kyle crouched behind a screen of brush. Drift settled beside him, low and still. They waited. Waiting was a skill most people misunderstood. They thought it was the absence of action. It was not. Waiting was hunger on a leash. Waiting was the refusal to let fear choose the hour. 20 minutes passed. Then a vehicle rolled slowly down the road without headlights. Kyle's eyes narrowed. A dark SUV. It moved past the house once, slow enough to study, fast enough to pretend it had not stopped. The driver's window was tinted. No plates visible from this angle. It continued another 100 yards, then pulled off near the old culvert where brush grew thick. The engine died. A man stepped out. He was tall, early 40s, broad across the chest, but not heavy. He moved with the economical precision of someone who had once worn a badge or a uniform and later learned how much easier life became without rules. His hair was dark and cut close at the sides, with a slight widow's peak. A trimmed beard sharpened his jaw rather than softened it. He wore a black jacket, dark jeans, and boots with ridged soles. Kyle recognized the tread pattern from the night before. The man stood beside the SUV for a moment, not smoking, not calling, not fidgeting. Assessing. This was no petty thief. This was a hired man. Later, Kyle would learn the name Lucas Voss. For now, the man was only shape, movement, method. But method told Kyle plenty. Voss did not approach the house again. He moved instead toward the road shoulder, scanning the ground near where Kyle's truck tires had passed. Drift's body tightened beside him. Kyle touched 2 fingers lightly to the dog's shoulder. Hold. Drift held. Voss crouched near the road and placed something beneath a broken marker post. Not on the truck. Not yet. A signal marker? A camera? A pickup point? The movement was quick, professional. Then Voss stood, looked toward the old house, and smiled faintly. Not with pleasure, with certainty, as if he believed he had already begun winning. Kyle did not move until the SUV was gone. Only after the road had been empty for several minutes did he rise and cross carefully to the marker post. Drift remained slightly ahead, scanning the tree line. Under the post, Kyle found nothing obvious at first. Then he saw it. A small black device, no larger than a coin, magnetized to the underside of a rusted metal bracket. Not a tracker for the truck. A passive camera sensor pointed toward the road, positioned to catch movement in and out of the property. Kyle removed it with a gloved hand. Drift sniffed once and gave a low, sharp exhale. Metal. Plastic. Human scent. Road grime. The dog's disgust was almost comic in its clarity. Yeah, Kyle said. Rude. He pocketed the device. On the way back to the house, he moved slower. Not because he was afraid, because a new shape had emerged. The person outside the night before was connected to someone with resources. The photo, the device, the slow drive-by. Someone was watching for movement, not attacking. They wanted to know where he went before deciding how hard to press. That meant he still had something they did not understand. Good. By midnight, Kyle had created his first false trail. He used the old truck deliberately. He drove out through the main road, letting the broken road sensor see him leave. He passed the gas station again, then headed toward the county road that led west. At a turnout near an abandoned quarry, he stopped, stepped out, and placed the small sensor device inside the bed of a delivery truck that had been parked there for 2 days with a faded landscaping logo on its side. It was careless enough to be believable if found later, and likely enough to move in a different direction by morning. Then, he circled back on foot with Drift. 3 miles through cold woods. No lights. No direct path. Drift moved close now, not ranging ahead. His paws found quiet ground. His head turned often, checking behind them without being told. Kyle's breath stayed controlled, but his mind moved quickly. Who had sent the photo? Celia? Bexley? The unknown man in the USB images? Or someone above all of them? He did not know yet. That was the problem with networks. Pulling one thread did not tell you whether you held a loose string or the edge of a net. Near dawn, they reached the old house from the north side. No lights. No movement. Kyle entered through the rear and checked every thread, every sill, every quiet warning he had set. Nothing disturbed. Drift stood in the kitchen, looking toward the front door. Kyle looked at him. You think he'll come back? Drift's ears flicked once. Kyle allowed himself the smallest breath of a smile. Yeah, me too. He heated coffee on the stove and sat at the table as the sky began to lighten. The folder from Mara lay before him, the copied notes arranged beside it, the map beginning to look less like a mystery and more like a battlefield. He had been hunted before. Men had followed him through worse terrain than this. Men with better equipment. Men with less patience and more cruelty. But this was different. This was not a mission with extraction waiting beyond the ridge. No command. No team. No clean objective. Only his father's broken warning. His mother's old house. A dog standing between him and the dark. And somewhere beyond the trees, people who believed a man stripped of inheritance had also been stripped of teeth. Kyle looked at Drift. The German shepherd sat beside the door, calm and watchful, wearing the ugly nylon collar like a soldier wearing borrowed armor. His eyes were fixed on the morning light. Kyle reached for the map. They think we're reacting, he said quietly. Drift did not look back. Kyle marked the false route, then drew a second line no one else would see. They're wrong. Outside, the first sunlight touched the frost along the fence, and the old wire gleamed briefly like a blade. The hunt had begun. But Kyle Mercer had no intention of being prey. By sunrise, Kyle Mercer understood that the map was no longer a mystery. It was a wound pattern. The old kitchen table had become a battlefield of paper, pencil marks, and quiet decisions. Mara Bell's copied land records lay beside the printed map from the USB. Kyle had drawn lines between the repeated points, then erased half of them, then drawn them again in a different order. He had learned long ago that the first pattern a man saw was often the one fear wanted him to see. The real one usually waited beneath it. Drift sat near the front door, facing outward. The German shepherd looked different now, though nothing about his body had changed. His thick black and tan coat still caught the weak morning light in dark bronze ridges. His amber eyes were still calm, his posture controlled. But the way he placed himself in the room had shifted completely. He no longer wandered to investigate old smells. He no longer paused at corners as if listening to the house remember. Now he guarded. Not dramatically, not desperately. Simply. Like a vow with teeth. Kyle glanced toward him. You know we're going out. Drift's ears moved once. Yeah, Kyle said. Thought so. He chose one point from the map. Not the most obvious. Not the one circled the most. That was the kind of place a frightened man would rush toward and a patient enemy would wait beside. Instead, Kyle chose a lesser mark near an old service road east of the North Ridge, where 3 forgotten parcel boundaries overlapped with a maintenance corridor Mara had flagged as inactive but not removed. Inactive but not removed. That phrase had bothered him. Dead things got buried. Hidden things got mislabeled. He packed light. Water, field knife, flashlight, first aid roll. Printed copies sealed in plastic, and the copied data stored on a small encrypted drive that never left his inner jacket pocket. The original USB remained hidden in the house, far from the obvious places. By mid-morning, he and Drift moved through the woods on foot. The truck had been left where a watcher might expect it, angled near the old house, visible from the road. Kyle had taken the back route instead, cutting through pine, birch, and low brush silvered with frost. The forest was bright. That almost made it worse. Sunlight fell through the branches in clean gold shafts. Snow from an earlier storm lingered in shaded pockets beneath the trees, crusted at the edges. Birds moved between branches. Somewhere far off, water ran beneath thin ice with a sound like glass whispering to itself. The world looked too innocent for the kind of men who used it. Drift moved close to Kyle left knee, no more than a few feet ahead at any time. The spare black collar sat plain around his neck. It lacked the dignity of the leather one, but Drift wore it without complaint, as if equipment mattered less than purpose. Kyle followed the old service line Mara had found on the survey map. It was not a road anymore. Not truly. Just a shallow depression between trees, where the ground remained unnaturally even beneath years of leaves. A vehicle had once passed here, not recently, but more than once. Kyle crouched and brushed away pine needles near a patch of half-frozen mud. Beneath it, gravel appeared, small, crushed, deliberately laid. The kind used to stabilize access routes that weren't meant for public use. Maintenance, he murmured. Drift sniffed the exposed gravel, then lifted his head toward the east. Kyle followed his gaze. A line of old utility markers stood between the trees, most of them broken, one leaning like a tired sentinel. No power lines overhead, no visible structure nearby. Yet the markers remained. Something had needed a reason to exist on paper. They continued. After another mile, the forest opened into a small clearing that did not belong there. It was too clean. Not freshly cleared, but maintained in a way nature did not maintain itself. The brush had grown back around the edges, but the center remained low, the ground packed hard beneath dead grass. Near the far side stood a concrete utility box, knee-high, stained with moss and leaf rot. Beside it, half buried under dirt, was a rusted metal access cover. No building, no sign. No reason anyone would come here unless they already knew the clearing existed. Kyle stopped at the tree line. Drift stopped with him, the dog's head lowered, nose working slowly. Anything? Drift did not answer, of course, but his body did. His weight shifted forward, then back. Not alarm. Evaluation. Kyle waited. A minute passed, then another. Nothing moved. He entered the clearing. Every step felt loud. Kyle circled once before approaching the utility box. The concrete casing had an old county maintenance stamp faded almost beyond recognition. He crouched and examined the access cover. Rust ringed the edges, but scrape marks showed near one corner. Recent. Not new enough to shine. Recent enough to matter. He pried the cover up with effort. Cold metal complained against old concrete. Inside was not a deep utility shaft, not the kind that would explain a real service route. It was shallow, lined with plastic conduit and a sealed weatherproof container bolted beneath the lid. Kyle stared. Not infrastructure. Storage. He removed the container carefully and opened it. Inside were laminated maintenance invoices, old property access forms, and a small stack of carbon copy receipts sealed in plastic. No gold, no weapons, no cinematic treasure. Just paperwork. Kyle almost laughed. Of course, men who wanted to hide money did not bury it like pirates. They made it boring. He flipped through the documents, reading names, dates, payment references. Several companies appeared repeatedly, each bland enough to be invisible. North Line Access Management, Hollow Creek Environmental, Vale Ridge Service Cooperative, Vale. His mother's maiden name. Kyle went still. The word was stamped at the top of one faded receipt like a ghost pressing its hand against glass. Vale Ridge Service Cooperative. His father had known. Or someone had used the name deliberately. The forest seemed to lean closer. Drift suddenly stepped forward. Not toward the utility box, toward the clearing's far edge. Kyle looked up. The German shepherd stood with his body angled between Kyle and the trees. His ears were high, his mouth closed, his eyes fixed on the dense brush beyond the clearing. Kyle slowly lowered the papers back into the container. A branch snapped. Not far. Drift gave one low breath through his nose. A warning meant for Kyle, not for the intruder. Kyle moved without hurry. He slid the container back into place, but did not fully secure the lid. Then he stood, turning just enough to see without presenting his back. A man emerged from the trees, not Lucas Voss. This one was younger, maybe late 20s, with a narrow face, a thin blonde beard, and nervous shoulders under a brown work jacket. His eyes were pale and restless, Bohemissa darting from Kyle to Drift to the open utility cover. He wore muddy boots and carried no visible weapon, but his right hand hovered too close to his jacket pocket. A local, maybe. Or someone hired because locals knew how to move through local woods. "Private land," the man said. His voice tried to sound firm and failed. Kyle did not move. "County maintenance corridor." The man's mouth tightened. "Not anymore." "That's interesting." Drift took one step forward. Only one. The man noticed. His face changed. Fear did not always look like panic. Sometimes it looked like arithmetic. One man. One dog. One bad decision. Kyle kept his voice even. "Who sent you?" The man swallowed. "Nobody." Wrong answer. Too fast. Drift lowered his head slightly, not aggressive, but focused. His amber eyes locked on the man's hand near the pocket. Kyle saw it too. "Move that hand slow," Kyle said. The man hesitated. Drift's front paws shifted. Ready. The forest held its breath. Then the man pulled his hand away from his pocket and raised both palms. "Look," he said. "I just check sights. That's all. I don't know anything." "What sights?" "I said I don't know." "You knew this one." The man's eyes flicked to the utility box. There it was. A tiny betrayal of the face. Men could train their mouths. Their eyes lagged behind. Kyle took one step closer. Drift moved with him. Not ahead now. Beside him. A living shield tuned to the movement of bone and fear. The man backed up. "You shouldn't be here. People keep saying that. They'll come." Kyle held his gaze. "Who?" The man did not answer. Instead, he looked past Kyle, toward the old access route. Not at the house, not at the road. At the corridor. Kyle understood then. The clearing was not the prize. It was one point in a path, a place where records, money, and answer and movement had touched briefly before flowing elsewhere. The man turned and ran. Drift surged half a step. "Hold," Kyle said. The command was quiet, but iron. Drift stopped. The man vanished through the brush, crashing badly now, all his carefulness gone. Kyle let him go. A frightened runner could lead danger back. A watched runner could also tell you which direction mattered. Today, the direction mattered more. He returned to the utility box and photographed every document before replacing them exactly as found. He took only one thing, a receipt where Vale Ridge Service Cooperative appeared beside two of the companies from the USB transfer files. Not enough to prove everything, enough to connect. By afternoon, Kyle had visited two more marked locations. The second was an abandoned roadside storage shed with no sign, a collapsed roof on one side, and a locked metal cabinet inside that contained old fuel logs and access permits tied to another shell company. The third was a dry culvert beneath a logging road, where someone had painted over old survey numbers but failed to cover them completely. There, Kyle found nothing physical to take, but he recognized 3 partial markings from Mara's archive copies. The pattern sharpened. Money had moved through service contracts. Land had been hidden under maintenance classifications. Names shifted, but routes repeated. His father's USB had not been a complete case. It had been a match struck in a dark room. Now Kyle could see the walls. Near sunset, he returned toward the old house by a different route. The light had gone copper between the trees. The air smelled of cold sap and coming snow. Drift moved closer than before, his shoulder almost brushing Kyle's leg. They were half a mile from home when Drift froze. No gradual slowing, no uncertainty. One moment moving, the next still. Kyle stopped immediately. Ahead, the forest path narrowed between 2 fallen logs. The place was perfect. Too perfect. Kyle lowered his gaze. A thin line stretched ankle-high across the path, nearly invisible in the dim light. Not a lethal trap. A tripwire. Attached to a cluster of cans and glass hidden under leaves. Noise alarm. Someone had placed it there recently. Crude, but effective. Designed not to kill, to reveal. Kyle crouched and studied it. Drift stood in front of him, body facing the deeper woods, not the wire. The trap was not the threat. The listener was. Kyle looked beyond the fallen logs. Nothing moved. But somewhere out there, someone expected the sound of cans, expected proof of direction, expected a man to walk without seeing. Kyle carefully disabled the wire, then reset it slightly higher and angled it toward a deer path leading away from the house. A small correction. A lie returned to sender. They continued through thicker brush, slower now. Kyle's mind worked through the day's discoveries. The receipts, the companies, the repeated corridors, the frightened young man, the noise trap. The way the hidden system was still alive enough to notice disturbance. His father had not stumbled onto an affair and panicked. No, the affair had been the door. Behind it was machinery, financial, legal, local, possibly medical. His father had only had time to save fragments because the moment he understood the shape began closing around him. Kyle felt the old anger return, but it had changed. It no longer burned wild. It burned narrow, useful. When they reached the old house, dusk had swallowed the porch. The truck still sat in place, visible and empty. No broken windows, no disturbed threads, no obvious entry. Inside, Kyle locked the door and spread the day's evidence across the kitchen table. Drift drank water, then returned to the doorway. Always the doorway. Kyle opened the copied USB files and laid the new receipt beside the partial transfers. One company name matched, then a payment date, then a property corridor, then a maintenance classification. Piece by piece, the first chain formed. Not complete, but real. He wrote the words carefully in his notebook. Vale Ridge, to Northline, to Hollow Creek, to medical timing. He stared at the last phrase. Medical timing. The word sat there like something poisonous. The documents from the marked sites did not prove what had been done to his father. Not yet. But they proved the people around his father had been moving money and land through hidden channels while his health declined, and the will changed. That was not coincidence. It was proximity with motive. Drift lifted his head suddenly. Kyle looked toward the front window. Nothing visible, only his own reflection in the dark glass. Tired eyes, hard jaw. A man standing at the edge of something too large to strike with fists. He turned off the kitchen light. The reflection vanished. Outside, the forest remained. Somewhere beyond it, men who thought they were hidden were learning that a hidden thing could be followed by the damage it left behind. Kyle sat in the dark with the evidence before him. He did not feel triumph, only weight. Because truth, once assembled, did not become lighter. It became a responsibility. Drift came to stand beside him. The dog pressed his shoulder against Kyle's knee. Kyle rested one hand on his head. "You were right," he whispered. Drift breathed quietly. "This is bigger than her." The name Celia went unspoken. It no longer fit the whole danger. Kyle looked at the map one last time. The repeated points had become a skeleton. The receipts had given it tendons. The USB had given it blood. And now Kyle knew with cold certainty that he was no longer searching for the truth. He was standing inside it. By morning, Kyle Mercer had stopped thinking of the evidence as paper. Paper could be burned. Files could be deleted. Photographs could be called fake by people with expensive suits and calm voices. What lay on the old kitchen table was not paper. It was pressure. The first weak chain had formed in the night. Shell companies, maintenance corridors, hidden parcels, payment dates, and the timing of his father's decline. It was not enough to walk into court and end everything with one clean blow. Real life rarely gave justice a sword. More often, it gave a man dull tools and asked whether he had the patience to use them correctly. Kyle stood over the table while the morning light spread thinly across the room. Drift sat beside the front door, the ugly black nylon collar around his neck, his amber eyes fixed on the yard beyond the glass. The German shepherd had barely slept. Neither had Kyle. The old house was quiet, but no longer felt empty. It felt enlisted. The floorboards, the kitchen table, the cracked mirror upstairs, the cold windows that had watched his mother wait, and his father return too late, all of it seemed gathered around him now. Not speaking, not forgiving, just witnessing. Kyle packed the evidence into 3 separate places. One folder stayed with him. One copy went into a sealed envelope beneath a loose board in the pantry. One encrypted drive went into the lining of Drift's travel harness. He smiled grimly at that. "Old habit," he murmured. Drift looked back at him, unimpressed. Kyle drove into Brackenridge before noon, but not directly to the records office. He parked 2 blocks away, walked through the rear alley behind the diner, crossed at the pharmacy, then entered the county annex from the side entrance used by delivery clerks and smokers hiding from winter wind. Mara Bell was already waiting. She sat at the back table, surrounded by land books and old survey sheets, a paper cup of coffee untouched near her elbow. In daylight, she looked more tired than she had the day before. The sharpness remained in her gray-green eyes, but there were shadows beneath them now, as if she had spent the night wrestling with the same invisible beast Kyle had brought to her door. "You found something," she said. Kyle placed the receipt and photographs on the table. Mara did not touch them at first. She only looked. Then she drew in a slow breath. "Vale Ridge," she said. "You know it?" "No." Her mouth tightened. "That's what bothers me. I know almost every service cooperative in this county, real or fake. This one should have crossed my desk if it was legitimate. It wasn't." Mara finally picked up the receipt. She studied the company names, the dates, the location codes. Her face changed the way a locked room changes when someone finds the hidden door. Not surprise. Confirmation. "We need someone who can follow the money," she said. "I know. I can show where the land vanished. I can show records were altered, misclassified, buried. But I can't prove why money moved through them." Kyle nodded. "Who can?" Mara hesitated. That hesitation told him the answer came with a cost. "There's a man," she said. Daniel Crow. The name seemed to put dust in the air. Mara continued. Former internal auditor. Worked for Halden & Price out of Portland. 10 years ago, he exposed a laundering scheme tied to municipal contracts. He was right. They buried him anyway. Buried how? Career first. Reputation second. Marriage third. From what I heard. Why would he help? Mara looked down at the receipt. Because men like him don't stop seeing patterns just because no one pays them to look. Daniel Crow worked out of a small office above an old print shop on Mercer Street, a coincidence Kyle did not appreciate. The stairwell smelled of toner, wet coats, and burnt coffee. A cracked glass door bore his name in black vinyl letters, half peeled at the edges. D. Crow, Forensic Accounting Consultant. Inside, the office was cramped and cluttered. Boxes of files crowded the walls. 2 monitors glowed on a desk scarred by years of elbows and bad news. A dead plant leaned in the window as if trying to escape. Daniel Crow was in his mid-50s, thick around the middle, with thinning gray hair brushed back carelessly and a short beard that looked more forgotten than styled. His shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled unevenly to his forearms, and his tie hung loose at his collar like it had surrendered hours ago. But his eyes were alive, dark, restless, almost feverish with attention. They moved over Kyle, Mara, the folder, and Drift in one sweep. Drift stood near the door, silent and watchful. Daniel stared at the dog. He bite? If needed, Kyle said. Daniel nodded. Good. Most institutions would run better with one honest dog at the entrance. Mara almost smiled. Kyle placed the documents on Daniel's desk. Daniel did not speak for a long time. He sorted, then resorted. Then pulled a legal pad close and began writing numbers in tight columns. He moved quickly, but not carelessly. His fingers were stained with ink near the nails. Every so often he made a small sound under his breath, not quite a word, more like a man recognizing an old enemy by its footsteps. After nearly 40 minutes, he leaned back. This isn't fraud by accident, Daniel said. Kale said nothing. Daniel tapped the receipt. These companies are too boring to be real businesses and too structured to be random shells. They're pass-through entities. Money comes in as service payment, maintenance access, land management. Then it breaks into smaller payments and leaves under vendor classifications. Mara folded her arms. How many? From this sample? Daniel exhaled. At least 4. Probably more. And the will? Kyle asked. Daniel's eyes shifted. There it was. The center of the labyrinth. Money explains motive, Daniel said. Land explains mechanism. But the will itself needs medical and legal pressure. You need capacity challenged. Properly. Kyle's jaw tightened. My father was on medication. Then you need the old doctor. The words landed harder than expected. The old doctor. Not Dr. Malcolm Vire, with his soft voice and smooth hands. The one before him. The one pushed aside before the final weeks. Mara knew the name. Dr. Helen Rusk. Daniel looked at her. She's still local? Retired. Lives near St. Alder Lake. Kyle gathered the papers. Daniel raised a hand. I'll help. Kale paused. Daniel's expression had shifted. Beneath the cynicism and exhaustion, something old had lifted its head. Why? Kyle asked. Daniel looked at the documents, then at the dog, then back at Kyle. Because men like this don't just steal money, he said quietly. They teach the world that truth is useless. I object to that. St. Alder Lake lay north of town, bright under a sky that had cleared to a hard blue. The house where Dr. Helen Rusk lived stood near a line of birches, modest and square, with wind chimes on the porch and stacked firewood arranged with military precision. Dr. Rusk opened the door herself. She was in her late 60s, tall and thin, with silver hair cut to her jaw and dark brown skin lined by age, weather, and long years of telling frightened families what they did not want to hear. Her eyes were deep-set and direct. She wore a navy cardigan over a white blouse, and her hands, though veined and slender, had the steady confidence of a weapon who had held life and death without flinching. When she saw Kyle, something in her face softened. "You're Thaddeus Mercer's son." "Yes, ma'am." She looked past him at Drift. The dog stood calm at his side. "Your father liked dogs more than people," she said. Kyle almost laughed. "That sounds like him." She invited them in. The living room smelled of tea, old books, and wood smoke. Dr. Rusk listened without interrupting as Kyle explained only what she needed to know: the changed will, the medication records, the timing, the new doctor. When he showed her the copies, she put on narrow reading glasses and went very still. The room seemed to draw itself tight around her silence. "This dosage," she said at last. Kyle leaned forward. "It would have impaired judgment?" Dr. Rusk removed the glasses slowly. "At this combination, with his condition, yes, severely, depending on timing." "Could he have understood a new will?" Her jaw tightened. "Not in the way the law requires." Kyle closed his eyes for half a second. Not relief. Something more painful. Confirmation always had teeth. Dr. Rusk stood and went to a small writing desk near the window. She opened a drawer, removed a folder, and set it before him. "I kept notes," she said. "After I was replaced, I documented my concerns. I sent one letter to the family attorney." "Ethan Rowe," Kyle said. "Yes. He was replaced, too." Dr. Rusk looked at him. For a moment, her expression was not that of a doctor, but of an old prophet watching the plague finally show its true name. "Then your father was more alone than he should have been," she said. The sentence entered Kyle quietly, and broke something quietly. All these years, he had believed his father chose silence because he had nothing to say. Now he wondered whether the old man had been trying to speak from inside a room others had locked. Outside the window, Drift lifted his head. He was staring not at the road, not at the trees, but at Kyle's reflection in the glass. The look was steady, almost unbearably gentle. Not pity. Recognition. As if the dog, who did not understand wills or medical records or forged intentions, understood the only thing that mattered. The anger in Kyle was changing shape. It was no longer a wall. It was becoming a door. Dr. Rusk signed a statement that afternoon. Not dramatic, not emotional, precise, clinical, devastating. With Daniel tracing the money and Mara documenting the land manipulation, Dr. Rusk's statement became the third pillar. The evidence still had to move carefully. Kyle did not send everything at once. He placed it in channels that required response: probate review, medical licensing inquiry, suspicious transaction reporting, land records audit. Small filings, correct filings. The kind powerful people ignored until the floor beneath them began to split. Celia Mercer did not fall in one scene. She fell in stages. First, an account was frozen pending verification. Then a transfer linked to Hollow Creek Environmental was flagged. Then Vale Ridge Service Cooperative appeared in records no one could explain. Then Dr. Rusk's statement reached the probate court. Then Ethan Rowe came forward. He was older than Kyle remembered, broad-shouldered but stooped now, with a white beard, heavy brows, and hands swollen from arthritis. His voice remained rough and steady. He confirmed that Thaddeus had never intended to leave everything to Celia. He confirmed concern about sudden medication changes. He confirmed that he had been dismissed abruptly when he questioned capacity. The false will did not explode. It collapsed. That was better. Explosions left smoke. Collapse left structure exposed. The court declared the revised will invalid pending full review, citing lack of testamentary capacity and credible evidence of undue influence. Assets were frozen. The estate transfer halted. The prior will was retrieved. Celia's polished world began to crack along every hidden seam. Investigators followed Daniel's trail into the financial network. Shell companies. False service contracts. Hidden property movement. Payments routed through maintenance corridors and dormant land classifications. Names emerged. Not all of them were Celia's. That made it worse for her. She had not been a lonely villain in a dark room. She had been part of a machine, and machines did not love their parts when they failed. Kyle saw her only once after it began, outside the courthouse. Celia wore black, elegant as ever, but the precision had thinned. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back too tightly. Her skin looked pale beneath the winter light. Her green eyes found Kyle across the steps. For the first time, she did not look finished with him. She looked afraid of what he had become. Drift stood beside Kyle, not growling, not lunging. Just present. Celia's gaze dropped to the dog, and something like hatred crossed her face. Not because Drift had bitten her, because he had carried what she never thought to search. Kyle said nothing to her. There are moments when silence is not weakness. There are moments when it is judgment. Weeks later, the old house had changed very little. That was right. Some places did not need transformation. They needed witness. The porch steps had been repaired. The furnace ran more steadily. The broken shutter upstairs no longer tapped in the wind. In the kitchen, sunlight fell across the same table where Kyle had first opened the USB. The leather collar lay before him, repaired now with careful stitches. Not perfect. The seam would always show. The torn place had become part of it. Kyle picked it up. Drift sat patiently in front of him, black and tan coat clean, amber eyes calm, as if accepting a crown after an ordinary day's work. Kyle fastened the collar around the dog's neck. The metal buckle clicked softly. "There," he said. "Back where it belongs." Drift leaned forward and pressed his forehead briefly against Kyle's chest. It was not much. From him, it was everything. Kyle looked toward the kitchen window, where the empty hook still hung above the sink. In spring, he thought, he might plant lavender outside the porch again. Not to rebuild the past. That could not be done. Even gods in old myths could not return the dead without changing the living. But something could still grow where loss had been. His father had not left him a kingdom. He had left him a chance to stop a lie from becoming history. He had left him his mother's house. He had left him the dog. And in the strangest, most broken way possible, he had left him a path Danik from anger. Kyle stood on the porch as morning brightened over the northern trees. The estate remained under review. The network was being pulled apart by people whose names would never appear in the story. Celia would face charges. Others would too. The false will was dead. The machine had been named. Drift came to stand beside him. The wind moved through the pines. For once, Kyle did not hear accusation in it. Only breath. Only distance. Only the world, continuing. He rested one hand on Drift's head. "You stood in front," he said quietly. The dog looked up. Kyle's mouth softened. "So I could finally see what was behind me." And together, man and dog watched the light return to the house that had waited long enough. Sometimes, the miracle is not a door opening in front of us. Sometimes, the miracle is a quiet sign we almost overlook. A loyal dog standing in the right place, an old house still waiting, a broken collar revealing the truth at the exact moment it is needed most. Kyle thought he had been abandoned. He believed his father had left him with nothing but pain, questions, and a past too heavy to carry. But God was working in the silence. What looked like rejection was protection. What looked like loss was a hidden path. And what looked like the end of a family's story became the beginning of justice. In our own lives, we may not always understand why certain doors close, why people betray us, or why we are asked to walk through seasons of loneliness. But sometimes, God allows what is false to fall away so that what is true can finally be revealed. He does not always explain the path before we take it, but He never leaves us without guidance. So if you are facing a hard season right now, hold on. Stay steady. Keep walking with faith. The truth may be closer than you think, and the help you need may come in a form you never expected. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the story moved you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and the quiet miracles God places along our path. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and give you strength for whatever road lies ahead.